Well, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Our session is dedicated to the education and the museum as place of education. Let me introduce you Simonetta Polenghi, coming from the University of Milano. And your lecture today, school subject didactics in the history of education, sources and methodology. Thank you. You've got 2 minutes. Thank you very much indeed. My colleagues, I will use the first part, which is a theoretical part, and which is in the proceeding, to concentrate on the Italian studies. I hope you can hear me because my voice is not very high. As you know, the history of school subjects is rather recent, having started in the last 4 decades. It started with the so-called curriculum theory and the also sociological perspective, which urged historians to dedicate attention not only to laws about school, but also to the internal processes of school. Which means we have to look as historians not only to the laws, but how these laws or codes were really applied by teachers and how teachers are really taught. In fact, we know that normal teachers, but often teachers, did not follow exactly these prescriptions, but which could be differently interpreted. The same law in the same states could be interpreted differently depending on different economical, social, religious, and cultural conditions. In the 80s, the cultural studies trend influenced this approach, and then let me just remind the very important studies of André Chervel in France. Chervel developed this idea of school culture, and he stressed the fact that school subjects are not just a passive application or, shall we say, the simplification of high culture. On the contrary, the so-called school culture implies an active role of teachers, inspectors, textbook writers, and pupils. Here I will talk just about teachers. It means that they were active interpreters of pedagogical theories and school policy. I also want to remind you of the important work of Dominique Julliard, who talked about using this metaphor of the so-called black box of school, stressing the necessity for historians to enter inside the classroom of the past and see how actually teachers taught, with which tools, and how pupils actually learn. Now, school books are, as we know, a relevant source. The authors, we can research into the authors, who they were, the publishing houses, the contents, the images, as we have seen, the language, the style, the pedagogical traits, and also the political themes. And sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, teachers themselves were the authors, so this is important as well. I also want to remember the works of Professor Antonio Pinal in Spain. School culture is always related to school books, not necessarily vice versa. I mean, a school book, we can research into school books from other point of views. For instance, they are important for economical point of view for publishing houses. But Pinal stresses the link between school subjects and teachers' power and self-consciousness. Mastering one's own subject is a key element in the history of teachers' professionalization. So again, the history of teaching and of school subjects are strongly related to the history of teachers as a professional group in contemporary time, of course. So teacher education and training, the selections criteria, the career steps, trade unions, teachers' associations, the memories, the so-called ego documents, diaries, letters of teachers, they are all relevant sources for us, sources we have to use, shall we say, contemporary. the history of the process of professionalizations related to the building of school subjects in contemporary age. As we have seen in other presentation, teachers themselves produced magazines and reviews, particularly in the last 2 centuries, which are a window on their problems, their feelings, their life. They're an important source showing effort for teaching renewal and for economic recognition as well. In Italy, it is worth remembering the great researches of various books, not only one, carried out under the guide of Giorgio Chiosso, the University of Turin, which this work ended up with the publication of catalogues of school and education magazines and reviews in Italy before and after the unification. So it was an enormous national work, and these books are, for us now, a very important tool. Again, Giorgio Chiosso has also led wide researches about school publishing houses and school books, both in the 19th and in the 20th centuries. See, for instance, his electronic catalogs, Edisco and Dell'educazione. Again, these are relevant tools. Then we have quite a lot of works about teachers' associations. Professor Alberto Barausse, who spoke this morning, has deeply analyzed the history of the Unione Magistrale Nazionale, the first national teachers' union, not only an association and a union. Carla Rizzoli of my university has provided a careful reconstruction of Catholic teachers' culture, associations, magazines, teaching methods in Lombardy, but not only Lombardy, also in the entire Italy from 1880 to 1950. So here you can see again this link between teachers' association and school books and didactics. Mirella De Scienza of the University of Bologna has carried out various works on teachers' culture, associations, and teaching in the important city of Bologna after the unification. We can see, for instance, the learning and use of Montessori method by Catholic as well as non-Catholic teachers, and make a comparison thanks to these works. We can also see the spread of a positivistic method or the influence, later on, of idealism, and the key role of Lombardo Radice, who was a foremost professor of education in Italy. The participation of Catholic teachers to the process of nation building. Let me remind you that in Italy there was a strong division between liberals and Catholic after the unification. But if we look, for instance, at the First World War, we can see that Catholic teachers were very much involved with this process. Again, the entire corpus of laws, so the first step, knowing which are the laws, all this has been done. The entire corpus of laws about school books in the United Italy has been recently reconstructed by, again, Professor Barausse and Anna Scienzi and Roberto Sani of the University of Macerata. The last two have also published the acts of the famous Lombardo Radice Committee that in 1923 managed to judge all the elementary school textbooks then in use, hundreds, and is a marvelous, marvelous source, and very important now it's being published. Now I want to provide you with some examples of the recent historiography in Italy about this point. The teaching of some subjects has been deeply invested by political aims, particularly, of course, Italian language, history, and geography. Anna Scienzi has shown in different books how in Italy the teaching of history has never been, so to say, objective, but has always answered to a political aim. Praising the Savoyan monarchy before and after the unification, constructing the national feeling, showing the greatness of Mussolini, and so on. So, lay and political values replaced religious ones. Teaching of history in Italy before unification was really teaching of religious history. Programs and school books still retain the scheme of moral examples, though, so we can say that the frame was the old religious framework, Historia by Exemplar, but the content became lay. And it wasn't a coincidence that the majority of teachers were then lay, whereas before they were priests. In girls' school, the subject history was reduced and capitalized on the model. Before it was a model of saints, and then it became the model of good mothers, like the Roman Cornelia, who sacrificed themselves for their children's sake, in a patriotic sense, so again a lay example. It would be wrong, on the other hand, to think that other subjects were not involved in political intents. Maria Cristina Morandini of the University of Turin has shown that also mathematics was concerned. For instance, in Piemontese elementary school books, in the decade before the Italian unification, some problems of maths were provided, such as problems where the pupils had to work out how many were the inhabitants of Italy. This was the question. Italy was not there, right? The country was not united, so there was clearly a political link in this problem of mathematics. Latin, the work of Patrizia Morelli from Macerata focused on Latin as a subject. And she shows the gap between the official programs after unification and the real teaching in grammar schools, in high schools after unification. And this teaching was very bad and very disappointing. It didn't work. And then pupils had to learn everything by heart. It was just grammar and grammar. Eventually, there was an authoritative report by the famous poet, professor, and Latinist Giovanni Pascoli, who stressed the importance of literature and the importance of loving the Latin literature and understanding the spirit of Latin authors. And that led to a deep change in Italy to the teaching of Latin, and thanks to that, and thanks to the reform of Gentile in 1923, Latin teachers kept for decades a key role in the education of young sons of the reading class. So being a teacher of Latin, and Italian, Latin, and Greek was something very important, whereas before it was not so. So you can see, for instance, here as well, how the school subject and the altering of the school subject influenced the status of the teachers. Another example of distance between the norm and the classroom, the way of teaching. A relevant one is the failure of the famous Gabelli programs for elementary school in 1888. Gabelli was again the foremost professor of education, and his programs are the best of that century. And he introduced history and geography, not only the so-called three R's. And as historians, we judge them as the best, very, very good indeed. But the problem was that the rural teachers could not teach geography and history, as we have seen in other presentations this morning. They simply ignored these subjects, as was then shown by official inquiries. So these programs were very, very good, but too difficult, and they had to be reduced. Few words about a novelty and informatic approach. Most recently, some researchers have applied an informatic approach to school culture and school books. Again, in the University of Turin, Paolo Bianchini has analyzed nearly 400 books, textbooks, published in Piedmont before unification, and he proves the disappearance of the term catechism in the titles and the appearance of the term handbook. And this lexical shift is a consequence of the passage to a more lay and pedagogical approach. Handbook came from handbook, from the Austrian education. As for teacher training, a key question is to understand again the real teaching given by teachers, education, and training. The study of textbooks of education in Austrian Lombardy has proved the effectiveness, in this case, of the Austrian pedagogy of Milden, the progressive improvement of teacher training and their professionalization. After unification, studying these textbooks, we can see the gradual shift in pedagogical trends. The last example is about a very recent book by Francesco Ascoli, who's not a professor, but is the president of the Italian Association for Calligraphy. And he wrote a book on the history of calligraphy. And he shows the tight connection between the fading importance of that discipline and the lower status of teachers of calligraphy. A relevant source used by Ascoli are the archival acts of state examination for candidate teachers, which show the scarcity of good candidates in the last century. The lower their status became, the fewer people applied to become teachers of calligraphy, whereas before calligraphy was very important. The book highlights the didactic materials from the paper to the different kinds of pens too. So what can we say in conclusion? In spite of the richness of the work so far produced in Italy, much has still to be done. A relevant field is that of didactic tools, so of Schulmuseen, the Didactics Museum. Let me just remind the words of Yuri Meda, who belongs to the scientific committee of this conference. In conclusion, the study of the teaching of school subjects has been in Italy recently renewed, thanks to the use of different and overlapping new sources. And this led to the redefinition, at times the complete upheaval of a series of clichés inherited from oral historiography, which was in Italy mainly a history of pedagogical ideas, so very idealistic and not really a history of education process.